Who's all these guys over here? I ain't never met y'all, have I?
Hey there.
Jerry
Gonzalez.
Jerry Johnson, Roy.
Nice to meet you. Steve.
Steve, nice to meet you.
You talk about someone who's done a lot for wildlife in Texas, like Jerry Johnson. You'll never forget that man, I'm telling you.
The campus of Texas A&M University, its academic presence is felt worldwide since it opened its doors in 1876. Students excel in hundreds of advanced fields of study and research. That's why it seemed odd that on an autumn evening in 2004, one man was honored for his achievements and accomplishments with an endowed scholarship in his name, Jerry Johnston. He never attended Texas A&M or any college for that matter. In fact, Johnston was a high school dropout by the age of 16. Somehow, though, maybe as a result of a little dumb luck and dogged determination, he changed the way the world looks at one particular animal. And in the process, he opened the doors to $1 billion industry and put his stamp on the culture of Texas.
The Jerry Johnston story is the story of America.
If you took his ideas and took them into Harvard Business School, the professors would probably go, "Really? You got to be kidding me. This will never work."
Jerry was a visionary. Living proof you don't have to go off to college to be smart.
Jerry did the very hardest way to do it. He stacked everything against him.
It's amazing where he came from and what he accomplished and all of the hard knocks he went through.
It started a movement.
Attention hunters! The Hunters Extravaganza is coming to the Albert Thomas Convention Center.
Join Jerry Johnston, president of Texas Trophy Hunters, in getting close to South Texas whitetail.
It's the Deer Hunter Show of the Century.
A knowledgeable man like Jerry Johnston, president of the Texas Trophy Hunters Association, can achieve animal counts to establish population trends.
What is Texas Trophy Hunters?
Well, we're an organization of people interested in learning more about deer hunting.
I'm a member.
I'm a member. I'm a Platinum Lifetime member.
Over the years, Jerry has gained the respect of his peers and is renowned for his knowledge of trophy bucks.
I'm Jerry Johnston, and I'm just as much a whitetail nut as you are.
See the best bucks taken last season, plus winners of the annual taxidermy competition.
I don't know about you boys, but there's a mystique, a magnetism.
Nearly any hunter that you talk to today could tell you the first buck they killed. Can they tell you the first good-looking girl they saw? Nope. But they'll tell you about that first deer they killed. That's the way white-tailed deer affects people.
When a group of individuals get together, whether they're in their teens or whether in their late 70s, 80s, you're liable to hear a conversation about white-tailed deer and about maybe a deer that they had seen, deer that they hunted, deer that's hanging on their wall.
You know, when you choose a logo for a company, particularly if it has to do with the outdoors, the image needs to mean something. I began to create a drawing to illustrate the logo that I had in mind, and I came up with one of those animals that when you caught a glimpse of him, you would have thought you went to heaven.
He's an artist. And he's an entrepreneur, and that combination worked for him.
Of course, one side looked a little better than the other side, so I folded it right down the center of the skull. And then I traced the good side onto the other side, and that's how we came up with the logo.
That's crazy, and it's changed the whole landscape of South Texas.
He sat down and drew it on a piece of paper and decided it needed to go on every pickup. And by golly, you can drive around San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and you're going to pass somebody that's got one of those emblems on their vehicle. It's pretty amazing. He was a visionary in his own right who really had the passion and the desire to be able to do something different. He had the unique ability to be able to see things that other people couldn't see.
That's pretty much the way I did it right there. Been a long time ago since I did that.
He was a guy that had an idea, and then He sat down and figured out how he was going to carry out that idea, and it was the most novel idea of its time.
In 1975, when we started, the hero was the guy that killed the first deer of the season. And it didn't matter if it was 6 points or if it was 8 points or if it was 10 points. They killed deer. And so a lot of deer were getting killed that could be trophies, but they never made it that far. So that's why I came up with the concept of a skull, because a skull is something that is the remains of something that's not here anymore.
Texas Trophy Hunters changed the way people thought about white-tailed deer. It changed everything.
He was born in Corpus Christi, Texas, at a two-story house that the doctor had made as a hospital. That's where the babies came.
It was 1944, and my dad, Wayne Johnston, was in the Navy, and he was deployed in the Marshall Islands. The whole time he was overseas, they wrote at least a letter or two to each other. And my mom kept them in it looked like a treasure chest. It was just a small wooden box. After my mama passed, she left me everything she had. And to this day, I still have them. And for some odd reason, I just have not been able to bring myself to invading, if that's the right way to say it, the privacy between my dad and my mom. And I've never read any of them. A lot of people won't know why. And all I can say is that was private.
Joy was his mother's name. She was crying and Mama said, "Joy Ann, what's the matter?" "I don't know," she said. I don't know. And she said, "Well, do you think you ought to go to the hospital?" She said, I think so. So here Mama and Joy and Daddy ran off to Dr. White's hospital. It was more like I was his sister more than I was an aunt.
I always thought Jerry was born in Big Spring. But recently he told me that no, he was born in Corpus Christi, but by the time, he was on 3 bottles or 4 bottles a day, they moved to Big Spring.
The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping.
To some people, it would be referred to as the armpit of West Texas. There ain't nothing out there but sand and tumbleweeds. It has its share of drought, so it's pretty dry. To me, it was just dust and oil fields.
Wayne worked at the refinery in Big Spring.
When you're an only child, living behind a refinery just outside of Big Spring, you really are an only child. That's one of the happiest times of my life, as good as I can recall.
He knew what it was to be poor. He was poor.
He was a smart kid. He was the only child. And he did things that adults did. He wasn't afraid of anything.
Please don't take my sunshine away.
Next thing I know, my dad's heard about a dairy farm that's for sale in Lacoste, Texas, close to San Antonio. Biggest kick I got out of that whole deal is when we delivered the milk to San Antonio, the farmer's son always got ice cream. That's what I liked about the dairy business. Life was much simpler, and the late 1940s. And we hung around there, lost our tail on the dairy business. Mama says we're going back to Carpus. We went back to Carpus. I went to Fannin in the 6th grade, and from there jumped over to a school called South Park. And of course I went to junior high there. Then I finally made it to the big town, which was the first integrated school in Corpus Christi. It was called Carroll High. First whitetail deer I ever killed, my daddy took me on with him to hunt whitetail deer in the hill country just out of Uvalde, as a matter of fact. And it was a day lease. Back in those days they had day leases. They don't have them these days. $20 to $40 a day is about what it cost. But the very first deer I killed was a 10-point. I was hunting ever since I was a little kid. I'd always been a hunter. I mounted that myself because I was a student of the Northwestern School of Taxidermy. Tan to hide and the whole 9 yards. I don't know how I can remember it, but the address of where I grew up was 4213 Christie Street in Corpus Christi. And right across the street was a little good-looking girl, rode the bus with me. Her name was Diane Dupree.
He and Diane went to high school together, and they married and had 3 children.
He married her early on in high school, and he left to make a living so he could support his kids.
I finished the 10th grade. That's as far as I went. I guess I was too busy trying to learn something to go to school.
Jerry quit school in the 10th grade.
We consider him a graduate of Carroll High School. You know, he would have graduated in '62, and so he's invited to all our reunions because we all think that much of him.
In those days, the crowd I ran around with, they'd see an advertisement in a Field and Stream magazine in the back. It'd show an arm like that. And everybody that I ran around with, they were all athletics. A bunch of them were big football players. I wasn't big enough to be a football player back in those days, but everybody wanted to have arms. That was the deal. That was the attention getter. So words like, he's got 16-inch arms, or he's got 21-inch arms, that was the deal. You wanted to look good. And just about everybody I hung with, we all started working out. I mean, we was lifting weights Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, every damn week. There's actually 3 types of competition that have to do with how big your muscles are. The one I got into to begin with was called powerlifting. It was a series of 3 different lifts, and your score was a combination of what you lifted, and each of those 3 lifts all added up into one. So powerlifting was the way to get real strong and real bulky. So I did that for a while till I tore up everything. I'm still tore up today. This right shoulder, it's almost gone right now. But then there was bodybuilding, and bodybuilding was Mr. Beautiful. So you slim down, low carbs, not much fat on you at all. You had to do on stage in front of people, you had to pose and show how good you looked and all that sort of thing. That lasted a little while. But I went right back to the powerlifting. I guess the one lift that I exceeded in over most people was the bench press. I got to a point, I was doing 10 reps for 400 pounds. I'm pretty sure that this competition was in El Dorado, Arkansas. I never made it to 485. I think the best single bench that I ever did was 440. And because of my skeletal makeup. I'm not what you'd call a big bone person. I started tearing stuff up. I mean, joints and tendons and muscles and all sorts of things. So, and then finally you just get burned out on it. You just kind of hang it up. And that's kind of what I did.
Just to see how it would stand up, they tried to make the Corvair roll over. It wouldn't. They locked the wheels, so it had to roll over.
One of the earliest jobs I ever had, I was really making any money, was I was a body man for 15, 20 years, I guess. At the time that I'm thinking about right now, I was in Dallas, Texas, working for Ruart McKinnon Chevrolet. And every day at lunch, I'd look down there and a kid showed up. I never talked to nobody. About 3 days went by, I went down there and talked to him and introduced him. I said, "My name is Jerry Johnson. What's your name?" He said, "Danny Hurt." I said, "Where are you from, Danny?" He said, "Alabama." He was 17, I believe. Best I can remember, he was 17 years old, and I was 19 or 20. So I took him under my wing, and, you know, that's the only way you could get into a place where you could drink and play pool. Danny became the closest thing I have to a real brother, because I have no brothers, I have no sisters. And at the time, little did I know that down the road, he was going to become a very important part of my life. After a few years, it became obvious that Diane and I had made a mistake getting married at the age that we did, which was, for the time, very young.
Jerry got a divorce. He always liked automobiles. He and a friend of his, Danny Hurt, they scrapped cars a lot and sold the parts, bumpers, fenders.
Having become a body man, you know, you learn about all kinds of stuff, where the parts come from, what do they cost, what's this, what's that, whatever. But after a little while, Danny and I came up with this scheme that because I was a body man, he was a radiator man, we could go out and buy recyclable auto parts. And in most cases, what we bought and sold were the front end parts of a car, like the front bumper, the grill, the hood, both front fenders. We would find those in little neighborhood body shops that were in repairable condition, because there was a place in Dallas, Texas called Trinity Auto Parts that would buy them from you, and you could basically double your money. If you paid $2 for a fender, you could sell it for $4. They'd redo it, they'd sell it for half a retail, might be $30. So everybody was happy with the deal. We'd leave on Monday and we'd quit on Wednesday. We carried our lanterns and our minnow buckets, and our rods and reels, and a little old tent. We'd find a town when it got dark where we could pull down under a bridge and fish till we got sleepy and then go to bed. I can tell you some funny stories what happened on some of the river bottoms too. We'd cash in on Thursday and Friday. And we had a route, went all through East Texas and North Texas. Same people, same shops. They knew we was coming, couldn't hardly wait because we paid in cash.
He was by himself with those 3 little boys. He didn't have a lick of sense about whether your kids have to go to school or anything.
They were living on Prue Road in San Antonio, a little back road over there on the west side, in a trailer house.
He had to make a living and keep his kids in breeches.
I found an ad in the paper that said, "Make money hunting and fishing."
And he got a job selling memberships for the American Sportsman's Club.
From all points of the compass, the hunting clan begins to gather on opening day. This pilgrimage is the highlight of the year for many men.
You buy a membership, American Sportsman's Club had various places where you could just put your name in the hat and at a date and go hunting there, or go fishing there. And he was very good at that.
For a long time there, probably a year, I was doing both.
He's a salesman. He's a born salesman.
He was so good that one year he sold the most memberships. He was good at that.
We're talking about back during the early 70s. I was making $60,000 to $80,000 a year.
That sparked something in him to why should I be doing this for them when I could do something better for myself.
He could see the end of the American Sportsman Club coming because we were getting more members than we had land to hunt on, and he knew he had to do something for a living.
It all started several years ago when a man named Ray Scott got a bunch of his fishing buddies together in Montgomery, Alabama, and founded the Bass Anglers Sportsman Society.
Back in those days, I'd always admired what Ray Scott had done with bass.
They figured that matching wits with the KGO bass was one of the highest challenges that God ever intended man to take on.
And I just figured, you know, he's got a kind of a specific creature that he built an association for, and I just didn't see why in the world the same thing wouldn't work for people that love to hunt white-tailed deer. I was friends with a taxidermist down in Kingsville named Joe Hibbler. And it was Joe Hibbler who encouraged me and helped me never give up during those hard times. The concept of Texas Trophy Hunters, a lot of people don't know this, was dreamed up right here at Hibbler's Taxidermy. Wow. I was sitting on a 6-foot step ladder, and we dreamed the concept up right there. With no money, no experience, I got the idea of starting a club of my own, sharing the unique culture of hunting across the Lone Star State.
And he literally started with nothing, not even a high school degree, and with no money.
The first magazine that ever came out was only 32 pages long. I had no idea what I was doing when I started Texas Trophy Hunters.
He asked me would I write a column, would I help him with it. I said, of course, I think it's a wonderful idea you have. It's visionary. At that time, we, had national magazines like Outdoor Life, Sports Afield, Field and Stream, but they didn't really deal with Texas and Texas deer and Texas deer hunters.
And I can remember when I went to apply for a job with him, I answered a one-column, 3-line ad that said, wanted girl Friday that likes to hunt. I went to his office, it was pouring down rain, went in and I did a typing test, and he looked at it and he said, you used the correction feature. I said, no, I didn't. And he held it up to the light and he said, you sure didn't. And he looked at me and he said, okay, what's a Sendero? And I told him, he said, well, when can you go to work? And it was very slow going. I mean, very slow. And I can remember when Jerry needed money, he would sell shares of stock. And he had, I think there were 10 people that he sold shares of stock to. And that's what kept him afloat with his struggling membership.
I remember the time when I met with him and he says, what's the story? And I said, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is we got everybody paid. We paid the rent and the bills. And he says, what's the bad news? I says, there's no money left to pay you. and there wasn't. And so he just smiled and smirked and walked off. And that was basically the history for the first 5 years. It was just marginal. And but he had a dream still, and he didn't have much education, but he didn't seem to need it.
We had no guidebook, no experience, the blind leading the blind.
When I started laying out who I felt like would be the best writers is a column by Al Brothers. He was the man that could answer any question about a Texas white-tailed deer. I always thought he was the smartest guy in the world. I guess you would call this an inspiration. January 1976 for Jerry Johnston, Texas Trophy Hunters Hefe. 20 years from now, I hope the club is strong and sound as ever. I hope our deer herds are in as good, preferably better shape than they are in years past. Best wishes, Al Brothers. He was the man that could answer any question that you could ask about a Texas white-tailed deer.
Did he pay you? No, I did it for free. I thought to me it was a service to the hunters and sportsmen of Texas. I enjoyed doing it. To me, it never entered my mind to take money for it. I was helping him get started, and at the same time putting out information to people that needed it.
In the very beginning, we got paid every week. And I think I was making $80 a week. I think that's what I was making. And I remember one week he came in and he said, I hate to ask you this, but he said, because he knew I was married at the time, he said, do you have to get a paycheck Friday? And I said, well, probably not. Why? He said, because we're not going to have enough money except for one paycheck, and I got to feed my boys. I wanted to cry. I said, no, that's okay.
When Jerry started Texas Trophy Hunters, or Hunters Hotline first, we had Sports Afield, we had Field and Stream. Those were more of a national type magazine, more of a Kurt Gowdy type magazine as you'd picture Kurt Gowdy out fly fishing or something. Jerry's was about Texas. It was about Texas whitetails. When you're reading about it, you read about the town where you went to, where you hunted, where you crossed over, you had a serious connection to it. We didn't have it before that magazine came out.
I do remember my impression of those first Hotline magazines, and it was, for us, a marketing tool. And it created interest in Texas hunting. And that wasn't there before Texas Trophy Hunters. Nobody else was doing it.
He had an idea that, you know, he says, this is not just a magazine we're selling, it's a membership. And that's the way everybody felt. It's an association, and everybody likes to belong to a club. These are memberships. The magazine is secondary. But they felt pride in taking part in something that was a band of brothers of South Texas hunters.
They identified with it. It was like reading stories about themselves.
I don't think Jerry ever had any competition. Once he got it going, there was no way to have competition with what he was doing. He had all the synergies were right there. Everybody was right there. They knew if they wanted to advertise, get to the standard hunter, the guy that goes out in the field and loves to hunt, buys a blind, buys a pickup truck, buys corn, buys feeders, the whole releases land. They're right there in that magazine. They're getting it every month. That's how you get in touch with them. And Jerry recognized that, and the advertisers recognized that. That made it a win-win.
Far away, Muy Grande.
Lionel Garza, when he was a young fella, he had his mind made up to make his living off that gas station.
The legend of the Muy Grande, one of the most prestigious of all deer contests that honor hunters who are good enough or lucky enough to come away with the biggest of the big bucks, the Muy Grande.
The deer contest was just one of the many things that he dreamed up to get more customers to come in there to his spot. And he started out with the gas station as the headquarters, and it started getting popular, and that's where everybody huddled up. And of course, he was selling beer inside the gas station. It was just the thing to do. You'd go to Lionel's Muy Grande contest and look at who had killed what. And by then, he had a little cooler, so he could charge them a little bit, put the deer up for them. And the big deal was Saturday at noon and Sunday at noon. A lot of big deer came in, and everybody wanted to see them right fresh in the back of a pickup truck. Everybody had to go see who got what. He's kept the memorabilia of who won what, and a picture of their deer. It's just plastered with old pictures and photographs, and I think they ought to put up a bronze state marker. Birthplace of the Muy Grande Deer Contest for Texas. That's what I think.
Muy Grande.
A lot of young guys who love the outdoors couldn't wait for the next issue to hit the mailbox.
They could identify with the hunters in there. They were ordinary, regular men and women and kids. There wasn't none of this African hunting or exotic hunting. It was strictly white-tailed deer. And they identified with it. They couldn't wait to get a hold of it.
The only time that any other big game wildlife was ever put on the cover that wasn't a whitetail, we put a picture of a West Texas pronghorn on the cover. That was the only time that was non-whitetail on the cover, except that one time that we had a mountain lion on the cover. And that's the only 2 times there's ever been anything other than the whitetail deer on the cover of Trophy Hunter magazine. The early issues of our magazine was called Texas Hunter's Hotline.
Wow.
And somewhere in between, we thought about expanding it to a national deal, so we called it American, and it lasted about 1 year because people just started quitting. They don't want nothing national. They want it Texas.
I never realized that it went from Texas Hunter Hotline to American Trophy Hunters and then to the Journal of the Texas Trophy Hunters.
That's correct.
Jerry had this idea of, we want everybody to like white-tailed deer, and we want them to like big white-tailed deer more.
Texas Trophy Hunters, I mean, could there be a better title for a kid to go walk past the news rack and go, oh dude, that's me. That's the one, I'm killing this one this year.
It's called the Journal of the Texas Trophy Hunter. This magazine is written by Texas hunters just like you, who all share what they've learned with you. When you subscribe, you'll receive your copy of the Journal every other month. That's 6 big issues per year. You'll learn from such experts as whitetail biologist Bob Zaglin and Larry Wyson. You'll read plenty of articles on how you too can improve your ability at seeing and taking big whitetail. Each issue is full of photos of whitetail taken by our subscribers, and each photo is captioned so that you know all the details of how, when, and where each buck was taken. Call us now. I'll see to it that you get our colorful window decal and our handsome Texas Trophy Hunters patch, plus your own membership card, making you an official member of the Texas Trophy Hunters Association. You'll receive the subscription and the membership for only $20 per year. Call us now, day or night, at 1-800-800-3207.
I went to the first meeting of Texas Trophy Hunters. Jerry called everybody that he knew. We met at the Tropicana Hotel on the west side of San Antonio. Hibbler Taxidermy was there with a few heads. A few of the knife makers showed up. Basically speaking, that was the first Hunters Extravaganzas.
I helped set up some of the tables and move stuff around. I was just cheap labor.
The original gathering was called a convention. Of course, I invited everybody that lived in San Antonio that was in the deer business. And I think the first year after that convention, Fred Malley says, Jerry, why are you using the word convention when it's really an extravaganza? I said, done. No argument.
The vendors came in droves to sell their products at his shows.
We started, of course, in San Antonio. Our next adventure was Houston, and I ran into this guy named Harold Clemens that was at one of those shows, trying to convince me that if we wanted a big show, you bring that sucker to Fort Worth where I got some influence, and I'll show you what a lot of hunters are. And he was right.
We do have something kind of special coming up here. What, the 19th?
19th, 20th, and 21st.
Hunters Extravaganza, and it's put on by Texas Trophy Hunters.
That's correct. There's everything imaginable, Bob. You name it, deer stands, feeders, every major manufacturer of outdoor equipment and supplies is going to be there. If you're going to need a deer stand, if you're going to need a deer feeder, if you're going to need a hunting vehicle
think about trying to put that first one together. That was a thought in itself that says, hey, this is to be a great deal for everybody concerned.
The first Texas Trophy Hunters I ever went to wasn't near as big as the ones now, but everything they had, you were interested in it, and you'd never seen all that stuff in one place.
This is a way to get hunters hooked up with the people that advertise in my magazine. What a fantastic ploy.
It's the Deer Hunters Show of the Century. It's the Hunters Extravaganza. Come on down and buy direct from manufacturers and save on all kinds of hunting gear, like deer stands, deer feeders, deer sets, turkey calls, archery equipment, and much more. See the South Texas snake handlers and their pit full of diamondback rattlers.
See the best bucks taken last season, plus winners of the annual taxidermy competition.
Visit with guides and outfitters and book a hunt for elk, mule deer, turkey, or whitetail. Come on down and save on preseason show discounts. It's the Hunters Extravaganza. Don't miss it.
You look at all of the things that happened over the years relative to deer hunting, deer blinds, feeders, all of the stuff, the spin-off industries, if you will. None of that would have happened had somebody not had the guts to be able to roll the dice. You look at the companies today, Texas Hunter Products, they were a small mom-and-pop operation. They started going to the Hunters Extravaganza, putting their deer blinds out there, their feeders out there, their chairs.
A lot of people's lives have been changed by Hunters Extravaganzas.
It's the original hunting show that started it all. A production of Texas Trophy Hunters Association. The Hunters Extravaganza is the standard bearer for crowds, sales, and success. Since 1975, it's developed a culture all its own, with venues in Houston, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. For exhibitors or sponsors, there's not a better environment anywhere for expanding your customer base.
I think thousands of people come here just to see our booth and see what new products we have.
We've been coming to Texas Trophy Hunters shows for 14 years. We've done all of their shows. We love them tremendously. They love us. And we'll be coming till we probably are no longer around.
This place is amazing.
They call it the granddaddy of all hunting shows. The Hunters Extravaganza in 3 cities in August. After 4 decades and growing, no other event offers the target audience and environment for launching new products and services, expanding business, and brand exposure.
I would say Texas Trophy Hunters probably accounts for the better bulk of my annual sales.
If you hear about a Hunters Extravaganza in Texas, you better be there.
It has been so good that we've already run out of product. Sales have been out of sight. It's just wonderful.
Wow, look at the amount of folks out there. Let me tell you something, Texas Trophy Hunters, they bring these people. Every year I've done this in the last 4 years, it grows every year. This is amazing. Let's go do an alligator show.
Whether it's alligator shows, bungees, bulls, blinds, or big bucks, after all these years, the Texas Trophy Hunters Association captures an audience of thousands, all sharing a passion and passing on a proven tradition that is the Hunters Extravaganza.
They've sent their kids to college with money they made at the extravaganzas. They built houses with money made at extravaganzas.
So there's so many spin-offs of good things that happened to good people by virtue of the fact that there was a guy who basically had nothing, had a limited education, but he had one thing and he never left it, and that was his drive, his desire.
You know, getting back to the old days, like what we were talking about, him helping me get these memberships sold and dreaming up the name of the company and all that stuff. The feeling that I grew up with, being a South Texas hunter and being in this taxidermy shop, is something that I somehow wanted to make the magazine reflect that. I wanted everybody to see hunting like I saw it. Boy, oh boy.
Once in a while there'll be a rattlesnake sneak in. I'm kind of careless and leave my door open at night sometimes. It's always kind of exciting to come out in the morning. Most artists, as I know, if they came in here, it might make them sick to their stomach just to see the conditions that I work in.
Deer hunters everywhere know Don Keller's work. His illustrations of big South Texas bucks have become collector's items.
I didn't never go to, per se, any kind of an art school. I had a semester of art appreciation in college, but that was the extent of it. And it wasn't the kind of art that I appreciated anyhow.
Don Keller was a federal officer. He was a U.S. Marshal.
When I retired from law enforcement, I had two big sacks full of pistols and knives that I'd taken off of people over the years. Gave them all away. They didn't mean anything. There was one keepsake that I didn't think very much of at the time. I'd kind of like to have it back. It was a badge that, while I was wearing it, got shot off, and we found it several days later. Like I said, at the time, I just had to replace it with another badge, and later on gave it away with a museum up in North Texas has it, I think. Bad story.
That's when he started piddling with the painting and stuff. And it really all started because I had a place for him to sell stuff. And he'd do stuff for me. And as a matter of fact, I've never even sit down and counted them. But there's been several covers, Don Keller paintings, that we ended up in the day making prints of that, making them available. And we picked up a few nickels that way. But that's how Don came into this deal. He was just like us. He loved white-tailed deer. He just knew the anatomy of white-tailed deer, and he had his own flavor, how he expressed himself. And to me, he's one of the finest white-tailed painters ever has been.
Join Jerry Johnston, president of Texas Trophy Hunters, in getting close to South Texas whitetail. Share his years of experience in teaching you how to get close. Jerry will explain in depth what makes camouflage work well in different terrains. You'll learn about scents and how to lure in a buck. Also, about cover scents, how to use them, and which products are proven to work the best. With this tape, you'll enjoy the result of over 3 years of work on many South Texas ranches. You'll see bucks from a yearling class to a Boone and Crockett candidate. This tape is a must for all whitetail hunters.
I can't remember what year it was, but it was in the 80s, I'm pretty sure, probably the middle 80s, I would guess. It was just sharing hunting ideas.
With the site selected, first the old brush and heavy limbs are placed to form a primary cover.
I showed them how to build a brush blind, and how to do it, and how to set your rifle up.
Let's take a look through the deer's eyes and let Jerry share his experience and technique.
It was just a lot of instructional type stuff. And I would talk about what is a whitetail's greatest defense is his nose.
Now, we've talked about scents and lures, and we've talked about camouflage clothes. Let's get all this stuff, and let's go South Texas.
That was just something to do. I never made a lot of money at it, but it was somewhat successful.
Come with us now and spend a year with a whitetail.
The little newborn fawn knows that he's supposed to feed. It's his first time, so he's not really sure just how this is done.
I decided I was going to make a video about a year with a whitetail so that you learn his habits.
As with older bucks, this little one has begun to grow his first set of antlers in May.
A year with a whitetail was taking them from a whole year of what a whitetail goes through to even make it old enough to be a really big deer.
Here he is. This is the one I've been waiting for. Look at this guy.
Did it sell? I gave a copy of it to Nolan Ryan, and after I gave it to him, I got a note from him, and he told me once in person that it was the only video that he had no fear of showing it to his children and his wife. He just loved it to death, and so did everybody else.
The 16mm film footage you're seeing was taken nearly 25 years ago. And it's the only footage I'm aware of showing two mature bucks that are totally locked together that fight until their death. Billy Ray Light is the wife of a rancher named George Light. And she was at their home in Cotulla, Texas, when she got a phone call from a ranch hand. He told of two bucks that were locked together back in the root plowed area of the ranch. It was a 25-mile drive for Billy Ray, but she got there in time to record this extremely unusual event.
It just gives you a lot of really close-up information about whitetail that people who grew up in the city probably never go to learn.
And old Roman knows what happened to him. We found him in March. He had passed on just like a lot of old deer do. He was gone. I'll never forget old Roman Nose. I really got to know that deer. And I'll never forget the 1987 season and spending a year in the life of the whitetail.
Of the most perfect of God's wild creatures was the white-tailed deer. Let's go now with Jerry Johnston and spend another year with the whitetail.
After a year with the whitetail, people loved it so much and asked me, why don't you make another one? So I did a follow-up called A Year with the Whitetail 2.
By now, the fawn has learned to be alert and on the lookout for its greatest predator, the coyote.
It got too corporate. It wasn't a down home, sit beside Jerry Johnston around the fire storytelling. It was not a story.
Until next year, when we spend another year with a whitetail, good hunting to you.
A knowledgeable man like Jerry Johnston, president of the Texas Trophy Hunters Association, can achieve animal counts sufficiently accurate to establish relative densities and population trends.
He's changed whitetail hunting to a different attitude about what it is to hunt and what it is to manage your lands for the wildlife.
He really has. I mean, you drive down the highway, you drive through the brush country, and you look today and you think, how did this get started? And this guy really did have a major hand in what happened in Texas.
If there's a deer management principle, tried and true, it originated in Texas.
On a few of the larger ranches in the southwestern part of the state of Texas, for instance, a promising movement toward wildlife and range management is beginning to gather strength.
Texas Trophy Hunters has drastically helped the hunting in Texas. It's got more people interested in it, and it's good for the deer.
Jerry deserves the credit. It's interesting. There are two people that I consider to be my hero pioneers in deer management and especially related to South Texas, and that is Al Brothers and Jerry Johnston. Al Brothers gave us the first information about management. Jerry gave us a way to talk about it, to communicate with each other about what people were learning. He's would probably argue with me about this, but he is almost single-handedly responsible for the development of this mania interest in trophy whitetails.
Look at property values.
The ranches, for the first time, are beginning to regard the game animals of their land as an important money crop.
You could go into brush country in the 50s and 60s, and for little or nothing, you could lease a ranch for $3,500 a year, which was a lot of money back then, but you could lease a 4,000-acre ranch. Today, you can't do it. And part of that has to be with what's happened over the years and how this has progressed. Land values have gone up.
Back in the 20s and the 30s, we didn't have that many deer in Texas. Partly because of the screwworm.
300 million years before man appeared on Earth, the insect was here. In the United States and Mexico, it's screwworm.
The screwworm was devastating to the wildlife industry, particularly the whitetail, as it was to our livestock or cattle industry as well.
I think it was 1958 Dolph Briscoe started the eradication program.
I think Dolph Briscoe's the greatest governor in Texas history. And Dolph was involved with the screwworm eradication program.
People nowadays have no idea how life has changed on the ranches. Screwworms were horrible in that, especially a wet year, anything that got scratched was, I'm talking cattle, deer, anything living out there that got scratched was apt to get screwworms and die. And when I was a little kid, that's what people did, is they rode horseback for screwworms.
That completely changed the dynamics and the economics, particularly of South Texas. Well, all over the state, but particularly South Texas.
Dolph Briscoe did more to change ranch life than anybody in my lifetime. There is no question about it.
When you think about what land's worth today versus what it was worth in the 40s. Holy mackerel. I mean, these are magnitudes of increases of value. And Dolph Briscoe and Jerry Johnston are the reasons I think that happened in the state of Texas.
I do know that this trend of wildlife, there's no question about it, has increased real estate prices.
In the late 80s and early 90s, it was nothing. It was easy to find a ranch for $300, $350 an acre. The least expensive ranch I remember working on was $195 an acre. Today, that $195 per acre ranch would sell for $2,200 to $2,500 an acre. I know, it's crazy.
There were people who were starting to make more money off their land from their hunting fees than they were off raising their stock.
I'm in my 50s now, and when I was a kid, it was cattle wall to wall, fence to fence. Drive down the road now and tell me how many cattle you see.
All the country down here had cattle on it, but nowadays a lot of people don't want to fool with the cattle. It's just nothing but deer, and it's a totally different operation.
Cattle's not king anymore. Cattle's not king. Deer are king in South Texas. That's a fact. And there's a lot of young kings and kings that have those properties now that are taking care of them. And it's not like the kings on the King Ranch. I'm talking about people that have earned hard-earned money, go buy them a piece of property. They don't want cows. They want big deer.
The time, D-Day -1. In this case, D stands for deer.
In the 50s, before anybody had even thought about putting a high fence up around a ranch, say a ranch that was 5,000 or 6,000 acres, you're talking about a lot of money and a lot of fence.
His neck doesn't even close.
Oh, I know it. I know it. Now, see, that was taken about, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was.
It's just plain and simple. When you consider all the people that I got to know over a long period of time, Roy Hines is on the top shelf of management in the state of Texas.
He's told Mama, he said, you know what, we got the best hunting in the world in South Texas if we just knew how to take care of them. And that's when we decided to start building the fence.
His ranch, just outside of Charlotte, Texas, was producing at these deer contests some of the very biggest ones that get entered.
After a while, people started calling and wondering what we were doing because the high fence was, well, there just wasn't any others around and people weren't used to seeing them.
He believes the same thing I do. Our deer can be bigger than what we have. We can make them bigger. He was serious about growing big deer.
Well, I've been on both sides of the high fence. I could show you an article I wrote years ago in the 60s, and I can see where someone is trying to manage land that has a real problem on the boundaries, why they would want to put it up.
After Jerry had Texas Trophy Hunters going for a few years, he got interested in what was going on in Austin with the Parks and Wildlife Department. He'd call me and want to know if I wanted to go with him, and I'd say yeah. And he would voice his opinion, which was good sometimes and which wasn't too good sometimes. But he always said what he believed. That was the reason his opinions were sometimes rejected by Parks and Wildlife. He just said what he thought, and that wasn't always what they thought.
Jerry is an individual who doesn't mind stirring it up. You think about high fencing, you think about deer management. Those caused massive debates and discussions from the Capitol all the way to the coffee shops in South Texas. I happen to think he was right.
Is Jerry liked by everybody? Well, there's probably a certain fraction out there that is not happy with things happen. I've seen this in meetings where one of the guys from Texas Parks and Wildlife threw down the Trophy Hunters magazine, said there's what's wrong with the deer in Texas today. That's an attitude that to me, that's ridiculous.
Parks and Wildlife didn't think a lot of Jerry Johnston. Parks and Wildlife's interest was in the most deer for the most people. Jerry Johnston's Texas Trophy Hunters was big deer for people who wanted to hunt big deer.
In Texas, we're a private property right state. We're not California or even, Colorado, where the government owns most of the land. This is Texas. And although deer belong to the state, Jerry was very instrumental. He was one of the inaugural individuals that said, you know what? If we're going to manage these deer and we'll put them behind high fence, yeah, they still belong to the state of Texas, but we're going to manage them. We're going to have managed land permits, and he was correct.
All of my supervisors at Parks and Wildlife, they didn't like him.
I think we all understand that, and I love the Parks and Wildlife. Listen, man, those wardens do an incredible job. They got an important role of keeping the poaching and all that kind of stuff down. But when it comes to managing the resources of the state, nobody does it better than the private landowner. And Jerry understood that, and he was willing to fight that fight.
Any person that opposes the deer breeding industry or implementing and using deer to increase the quality or the size of the antlers, to me, this is the same guy that probably goes fishing where they release redfish, or they go where they've released trout, or goes to the Guadalupe River and fishes for rainbows. There's a lot of contradiction in that. If you catch a big bass, you give it to the state of Texas, they raise more big bass off of it. We stock the lake so we can catch bigger bass. We don't want to do that with deer. We had all these deer breeders, and it went from a few hundred to 500, 600, 700, just continually climbing the number of people doing it. And it became a complete industry amongst itself.
We had a meeting. It was me and Jerry and Gene Reiser. And we were trying to figure out what to do so that landowners would get representation, what was the best thing to do. And Horace Gore essentially sticks his head in, and I tell him what's going on, and he says, well, heck, Kroll says all you need is a letterhead. I said, what are you talking about? He says, get organized, be an organization. Them politicians listen to a letterhead. And so we decided to form the Texas Deer Association. And Jerry took money out of his pocket and his personnel at Trophy Hunters to support the first 2 years of the formation of the Texas Deer Association.
The regulations were overwhelming, and we felt like that as an association we'd have a stronger voice in politics to kind of streamline what we're doing.
TDA was not accepted by Parks and Wildlife.
Putting together the Texas Deer Association gave private landowners a voice, gave them a political voice, and it also helped develop a huge industry.
TDA improved the quality of deer in this state tremendously.
Oh my God, you wouldn't tease him.
We wanted to wait for you before we started the proper admiration for him.
That is our character of the year right now.
Jerry, he doesn't feel like there's any reason for him to step up and have any kind of apologies for standing for private property rights, standing for business rights, standing for the right to manipulate the game and the animals on your own private property. He's definitely made no apologies for that whatsoever.
Texas A&M did a study about what the deer industry meant to Texas, and believe me, it's significant. It is a very significant number. It says a lot about what goes on in Texas, and particularly the rural areas of Texas. None of this would have ever happened if it hadn't been for some guys getting in a room deciding they wanted to start the Texas Deer Association.
Like so many people, I had seen Jerry's video that he had done in the late 80s called A Year with a Whitetail. And I remember watching that and thinking his delivery was a lot like that Jacques Cousteau we enjoyed so much back in the 70s.
Long before there was a sprig of grass on earth, there was life in the water.
I thought Jerry Johnston needs a television program. He's got a Texas Trophy Hunters Association. He has a magazine. He has the Hunters Extravaganzas. He needs a television program. And so I met Jerry at one of the Hunters Extravaganzas in 1993. And I sort of pitched my idea to him, and he seemed totally unimpressed. He didn't have much reaction at all. I thought, well, that was a waste of time. Next thing I knew, the phone rang in a couple of days, and Jerry said, hey, let's go on a dove hunt. Thus was the beginning of the Journal of the Texas Trophy Hunters TV program. For about 5 years, we shot video, we put shows together, we edited, and finally went on the air in 1998 with our first episode.
Once we got that going, I used to call that the third leg of the stool because it was the only media that we weren't in. I mean, we were in the magazine association end of it, trade show end of it. It completed a circle. That was the third leg. That's what held the stool up. That's what made it work well.
When it first started and came out, it was the one you wanted to record and watch. It was fabulous.
He is a living pioneer of the outdoors. 80-year-old Bob Ramsey has spent all of his life in the Texas cedar breaks teasing, agonizing, and just plain fooling white-tailed deer. To walk in his shadow is to walk in the shadow of greatness. When it comes to hunting, Bob Ramsey is royalty, but with his gentle, unassuming posture of country folk. Bob doesn't boast about the trophy bucks on his wall. All he's ever dedicated his life to is giving others the most cherished gift of all, passing down what he knows about whitetail and horn rattling.
Jerry may have narrated the show, but you didn't see his face on there except right when it started and right when it was over. The show was always about different people, different Texans, different women, children, men, and it was their trophy story, their hunting story.
I wanted to create a program where it wasn't your run-of-the-mill outdoor show where it's, hey, watch me kill this, hey, watch me go here, hey, watch me do this. Jerry was sort of our narrator who led us through the experience, which was someone else's experience, and hopefully reflected that rich hunting culture that Texas Trophy Hunters is a part of.
I wanted it to be very much like the magazine. We weren't trying to make a hero out of Jerry Johnston. Everyone was a tale. We wanted a story that was true. They were just an average individual. They might have been a painter's helper, or they might have been a brain surgeon, but they're all members of the same flock. And you don't have to be anybody. You're just in a brotherhood. And that's what I wanted to show on the television show, is just everyday people doing every trade under the sun that you can think of. You name it, we brought them all together.
We would be slammed during deer season, obviously, shooting television programs. And then during the off season, we'd be editing and putting shows together. And all of a sudden the phone rang one day, and it was, I think it was late summer, and I answered it, and it was Jerry, and Jerry said, let's go shoot a program up in Wisconsin. And I thought, well, it's not even deer season. Why would we be going to Wisconsin? Little did I know what was about to happen when we got to Wisconsin.
He got to a point where he was getting around 65 years old, and he was getting tired.
Well, I got a call one day from Jerry, and Jerry said, "I've had an offer on the company. I'm thinking about selling it. What do you think?" And it was a shock, to say the least.
This would be perfect!
It's the original hunting show that started it all. A production of Texas Trophy Hunters Association. The Hunters Extravaganza is the standard bearer for crowds, sales, and success. Since 1975, it's developed a culture all its own, with venues in Houston, Fort Worth, and San Antonio.
He'd pushed it as far as he could. It was running at top speed. There was nothing else to do to it. And it was time for Jerry to slow down. He wasn't a young man anymore, and he could go do some of the things that he'd always wanted to do.
After all these years, the Texas Trophy Hunters Association captures an audience of thousands, all sharing a passion and passing on a proven tradition that is the Hunters Extravaganza.
He sells his TTHA. He takes that money and he looks for a place, and he's just not going to spend it on that land around him because it's just too expensive. So he goes down to one of the sorriest areas in Texas. I mean, when God was building the state of Texas, there's a few areas that he just, he didn't spend a lot of time on. That's right where Jerry bought. It's bigger than his little home place. He put up a high fence, started managing deer, built a hunting facility there, and started running hunters through it, and he was just having a great time.
Oh my God. You wouldn't tease him.
We wanted to wait for you before we started the proper admiration for him.
That is our character of the year right now.
Thanks, sir. I really appreciate you.
There's not a lot of wealth per se in that part of the state. It's they're hard-working people, but not a lot of rich folk. Until...
If you've been around Cotulla, Texas, then you've probably heard the rumors.
This is going to be good for South Texas.
In South Texas, the Eagle Ford Shale Formation is attracting more than a dozen companies who plan to drill thousands of wells.
And oil prices already are going up.
Eagle Ford is a hotspot for oil.
This new pipeline is part of an old-fashioned oil boom along a 400-mile stretch geologists call the Eagle Ford Shale.
And here in South Texas, a boom for the oil industry also means a boost for the local economy.
Energy companies are rushing here to tap deposits that could produce up to 12 billion barrels of oil and enough natural gas to power every American household for at least 5 years.
And listen to this.
It turned out his place was right in the middle of a sweet spot.
Jerry had no idea that ranch that he was going to buy was sitting on top of this literal ocean of oil.
And lots of people are striking black gold right now.
This makes Jed Clampett look like a piker. An oil treasure has been found in Texas.
A vast oil empire of money.
It caused them to produce some unheard of amounts of oil. Unheard of amounts of oil. 600, 700, 800, 1,200 barrels a day. So the Eagle Ford made tons of land poor people super rich.
And all this started when he got the mineral rights by accident, when he bought the place. Absolute blind, total luck. The fact that he got the mineral rights, even back in those days, nobody would sell all their mineral rights. If you bought a piece of land from a rancher, he always kept half the mineral rights. That was a standard forever, since I could remember. You never sold all your mineral rights because you never knew what would happen. But nobody had any idea it would be this lucrative. So the guy that sold it to him didn't even bother. He says, "No, I don't want the mineral rights. You can have them."
Jerry's now, all of a sudden, he looks smarter than he'd ever looked in his whole life because he bought the right land. And he's done real well with that, no question.
We designed it, and Don Keller, the famous Don Keller, who's passed on since, created this, and it surrounded the top of the display that we had for the competition, the deer competition, at the Hunters Extravaganza.
To say that Texas would be a different place today without Jerry Johnson would be an understatement. Don Keller and his wife Angela are who introduced me to my wife, Teresa. Bless his heart.
It is the story of America. Jerry Johnston proved that if you got a dream and you're willing to work and sacrifice, you can be a successful person.
A lot of years gone by.
The pursuit of his dream has left a legacy.
He started out at the very bottom with everything stacked against him, worked his way to the top, and the whole time he was dragging a whole lot of people with him too. Many won't admit it, some will admit it. But grab that magazine and look at those companies that started off with very little and how they're doing today. They may never go thank him, they ought to, because he helped every one of them.
We have north of $1 billion a year in revenues that come to rural communities and landowners because of the white-tailed deer. And that's a great tribute to Jerry Johnston.
It's just plain and simple. When you consider all the people that I got to know over a long period of time, Roy Hines is on the top shelf of management in the state of Texas.
He's told Mama, he said, you know what, we got the best hunting in the world in South Texas if we just knew how to take care of them. And that's when we decided to start building the fence.
His ranch, just outside of Charlotte, Texas, was producing at these deer contests some of the very biggest ones that get entered.
After a while, people started calling and wondering what we were doing because the high fence was, well, there just wasn't any others around and people weren't used to seeing them.
He believes the same thing I do. Our deer can be bigger than what we have. We can make them bigger. He was serious about growing big deer. The Angadi, the word Angadi is the name of their organization. Angadi was the Mexico Texas Deer Association. They wanted to manage their land the way they wanted to manage it, not the way that the state wants to manage it. And as far as I know, I was the only non-Mexican citizen that ever received that award at the time that I got it. As far as I know, there's just been 2 times that it went to somebody that was not a Mexican citizen. I'll be honest with you, I was highly honored to have received that particular award, and I've got it hanging on my wall to this day, and it's going to stay there.
Ooh, far away, muy grande.
Lionel Garza, when he was a young fella, he had his mind made up to make his living off that gas station.
The legend of the Muy Grande, one of the most prestigious of all deer contests that honor hunters who are good enough or lucky enough to come away with the biggest of the big bucks, the Muy Grande.
The deer contest was just one of the many things that he dreamed up to get more customers to come in there to his spot. And he started out with the gas station as the headquarters, and it started getting popular, and that's where everybody huddled up. And of course, he was selling beer inside the gas station. It was just the thing to do. You'd go to Lionel's Muy Grande contest and look at who had killed what. And by then, he had a little cooler, so he could charge them a little bit, you know, put the deer up for them. And the big deal was Saturday at noon and Sunday at noon. A lot of big deer came in, and everybody wanted to see them right fresh in the back of a pickup truck. Everybody had to go see who got what. He's kept the memorabilia of who won what and a picture of their deer. It's just plastered with old pictures and photographs, and I think they ought to put up a bronze state marker. Birthplace of the Muy Grande Deer Contest for Texas. That's what I think.
Muy Grande.